This is Inside Story's 2013 Year in Review. I'm Ray Suarez. Pilar Marrero, coming out of the 2012 elections and beginning the new legislative year in 2013, everybody was talking about how now the groundwork was laid for immigration reform. Big changes. Both parties had gotten religion on this issue. Here comes immigration reform. Now that we're in the waning hours of 2013, what happened?
Well, I think the tide turned, but it didn't turn as radically as we thought it would. The result of the election, the rejection of the Republican, self-deportation immigration policies made quite obvious that this was not the way to go for the GOP. But the problem is the Congress and the way the elections happen in the Congress, all these districts that just have a hard time moving on an issue like this because they're very conservative and very regional interests dominate. And we have an election year coming up, and we have a Congress that's paralyzed. So even though we saw a major advancement in this issue, the approval of the Senate bill, and we saw different changes in the states, like the driver's license bills and all, a major change towards a more pro-immigrant attitude, I think what happened was just the political realities in some districts made it impossible, and just the matter of just the Republican Congress or House of Representatives, they don't want to move forward on anything that could help Democrats.
Looking at it from Capitol Hill, did it ever look like such a slam dunk as it did in the editorial boards around the rest of the country?
Well, look, I think that what a lot of us failed to recognize was, in fact, the difference between the imperative that the National Republican Party felt, which was to get on and be behind immigration reform, and the reality of a redistricted America in which red districts are really red, in which this idea is still not popular, and blue districts where it's very popular. That's the story of Congress. It's the story on this issue as well. I still think it might happen in 2014. One big reason is the business community is really behind this idea, and some of those Republicans who weren't converts before the primaries of 2014 may decide after the primaries are over and they don't have a Tea Party challenge that this is still a good idea after all.
Professor Johnson, much like immigration coming out of the 2012 elections, one issue that was hot on January 1st, 2013 was reforming or taking a look at the nation's gun laws in the weeks just after the Newtown killings in Connecticut. And again, little or nothing happened there. Why is that?
Well, it's a mixture of Barack Obama and his inability to really wrestle together any kind of coalition in Congress, and it's also the absolutely recalcitrant Congress and about 20 to 30 Republicans in the House who basically refuse to pass anything that this president talks about. And not to go back, since we're sort of looking forward, but really this goes back to 2010. Those districts that got rewritten after our last census have completely changed how Congress had to work with this president. So whether it was Sandy Hook, whether it was another Colorado shooting, whether it was this George Zimmerman trial or the shooting of a young man, it didn't matter. Congress did not want to move on gun control, even though the vast majority of the country wanted something to happen. It was Obama's first of many failures this year.
Tevi, Troy, the rollout of the Affordable Care Act, your pick for the top story of the year. Though there were dozens of attempts to just simply dismantle the law, the last phases came online in the fall. As you mentioned, it did not go well. Could you have predicted that it would have been this badly handled, even as someone with some misgivings about the law?
Well, I've been writing for years that the law is very problematic. I did not imagine that the technical issues would be so problematic and that they wouldn't be able to get a basic website together. But there are still three major questions outstanding about the Affordable Care Act, and I think the prospects for those are dubious. One is, will costs go down? I don't think they will. Will the coverage go up to a sufficient number? CBO still says there's going to be 30 million uncovered in 2020. And then the third question is, if you like your health care, can you keep it? We already know for people in the individual market that that's a problem. The question is what happens for people in the employer-based market.
Pilar Marrero, does this story look different depending on where you are in the country? You're writing about it from California, a place with a lot of uninsured people, and for a community, and I don't think a lot of Americans realize the tremendous challenge of uninsurance and underinsurance among Latinos. How does the Affordable Care Act look from out there in California?
Well, in California, as you know, has its own market, its own website, which has been working a lot better than the federal website. And so we haven't had the problems here that you had in the rest of the country where they didn't have their own website. But of course, for the Latino community, which is a majority in Los Angeles and in California now, and a large number of uninsured in that community, there's always been a lot of support for this law. And I think people in the Latino community are rooting for it to work because they know they have a lot at stake in it.
Stake, Gerald Seib. There were 50 million uninsured people. How come there wasn't more of a public feeling that something had to be done about this? There was so much concentration on the law that we didn't very often talk about tens of millions of people with no health care.
You know, the thing is that I think there was some confusion, and I think people at the White House would admit this going back. What was the point of the exercise? Was it to cover the uninsured, or was it to sort of make health insurance a smoother experience for people in the middle class who maybe already had coverage? You know, originally a lot of the impetus behind the idea was get the uninsured covered, but politically that wasn't so popular in the middle of the country because that made it sound as if you were taking things from the people in the middle class and giving them to people who don't have health insurance. And so the purpose of the law kind of got shifted halfway across the stream, and I think the point of it kind of got lost in the exercise. The hope now, from the White House point of view, is, well, it'll make health insurance cheaper for everybody in the long run by bending the cost curve down. It wasn't any longer at the end in passage to cover the uninsured.
We have to take a short break now. When we return, we'll talk more about the international scene. This was an important year all over the world. Stay with us. You're watching Inside Story.